Good morning. It's good to see everybody out this morning. I hope you came ready to worship this morning. Time to spend with God this morning. Listening to the choir sing this morning just makes me happy. I know I got a place I'm going that one of the songs we sing said, "I'm not complaining because every day I'm gaining." That's a good outlook on life. It's hard to complain about things that are going on here when you realize you got all of eternity that's going to be even better. That's a good way to look at it. I got a couple announcements for you this morning. First off, don't forget we have church tonight, 6 o'clock. All right, first Sunday of the month, so make sure you come back tonight, and we'll have a good time here again tonight. Tomorrow evening, ladies ministry meeting at 6:30. That'll be here in the fellowship hall. Is that right? I think that's right. Ain't nobody telling me no, so I'm going to say that's right. 6:30 tomorrow night. Kids' Easter party. Easter's coming up. We got the Kids' Easter party coming up on April 20th from 2 to 4 p.m. All right, so make sure you bring all your kids out. They'll load them up with candy, give them a good time, and send them home all wired up for you. All right, but most importantly, they're going to hear the true reason we celebrate Easter. More than just Easter bunnies, more than chocolates and goodies and all that stuff. We're going to hear about Jesus and what he has done that gives us a reason to celebrate. All right, so make sure you bring your kids out to that. The next day is Easter, April 21st. We've got Easter sunrise service, and we got a good breakfast afterwards, so make sure you come to the sunrise service that morning. That's always a good one. It's not going to hurt you to get up a couple hours early. You can take a nap afterwards. It'll be all right. All right. And besides, you get a good breakfast afterwards, and ain't a better breakfast than that, trust me. All right, last thing, we got gospel singing with the Morrison sisters the following week, April 28th at 11 o'clock that morning. So make sure you come out and support them and show them that you love them and you appreciate what they do, all right? Now, before we go any further, I'm going to ask my mother to come up, and she's going to give us some information on Operation Christmas Child. It's that time of year again.
It's me again. It's that time of the year. I did have a video to show you guys, but due to some technical difficulties, if you don't mind hanging out for about 3.5 minutes after church, I think it'll be fixed. But I will let you know that this month we are kicking off our OCC collection again. This month will be stuffed animals, and they are in a plenty right now in all the stores due to Easter. Great time to get them. Even greater time to get them after Easter, because then they usually go about half off. I wanted to let you know that our boxes that we packed last year was 1,054 boxes. They went to 3 different countries. They went to Tanzania, Togo, and Ghana. As soon as I see any videos or pictures of any of the deliveries where they were given to the children, I'll try to get those up on a video for you. But thank you guys so much for everything you did last year. We've actually already gotten a pretty good start for this year. We have all of our toothbrushes and combs already purchased for this year. So we are just thanking the Lord for that, or a generous donor for that. And if you have any questions, or like to volunteer, like to help make any of the crafts we're going to put in the boxes, please let me know. If you can sew, we can definitely use your talent. But thank you guys, and remember this month is going to be stuffed animals. Thank you.
We appreciate all you do, and you guys do such a fantastic job every year supporting this ministry, and it impresses me every year. I hope that we can continue that. I believe every year we've increased in boxes that we've shipped out, and I have no doubt that we couldn't do that again this year. I have faith in you, and I can't wait until the end of the year to see how many that we can ship. All right? All right, it's time to take up our Sunday morning tithes and offerings so that we can support the church and all that we do here. So if you'll stand, we'll get Brother Eric to give us a song to sing, and we'll have our ushers come forward. Page 165 in the big blue book. Yeah. That's how you get more money right there. Bring the pretty face around. All right. Brother Scotty, you care to bless the offering for us? believe that's what I was told anyway. All right.
Y'all pray for me. If Jesus comes tomorrow to spend some time with you, would you answer all his questions or lie to hide the truth? Would you welcome him with open arms or even let him in? If Jesus comes tomorrow, what then? If Jesus calls your number, could you leave today? Are you ready to lay down your worldly goods and walk away? Would it take a month of Sundays just to tell him of your sin? If Jesus comes tomorrow, what then? If the sky turns black as midnight in the middle of the day, and somehow you knew that Jesus would soon be on his way, would you have to beg forgiveness, or could you reach out and take his hand? If Jesus comes tomorrow, what then? If the sky turns black as midnight in the middle of the day, and somehow you knew that Jesus would soon be on his way, would you have to beg forgiveness, or could you reach out and take his hand? If Jesus comes tomorrow, what then? If Jesus comes tomorrow, what then? I'll do one more. See, I could put it in D. D, yeah. What a journey it's been. Paul was a prisoner on a ship o'er the sea, and his ship with the tempest was tossed. But an angel of God stood by him and said, "Fear not, for none will be lost." What a journey it's been since I met the Master, and Jesus saved me from sin. The journey's been long, and I'm nearing the end. What a journey it's been. Well, I started on this journey years ago with the Lord, and sometimes my ship's in a storm. But the Lord, He has promised to never leave me alone, and someday my ship will sail home. What a journey it's been since I met the Master, and Jesus saved me from sin. The journey's been long, and I'm nearing the end. What a journey it's been. What a journey it's been. I'll just do that same one. You talk of faith when you're up on the mountain. Oh, but the talk comes so easy when life's at its best. It's down in the valley of trials and temptation. That's when faith is really put to the test. For the God on the mountain is still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right. And the God of the good times is still God in the bad times. God of the day is still God in the night. For the God on the mountain is still God in the valley. When things go wrong, He'll make them right. And the God of the good times is still God in the bad times. God of the day is still God in the night. God of the day is still God in the night.
Let's pray this morning. Lord, we thank you for all that you've done for us, God. God, we thank you for the fact that we know that no matter what goes on, God, you're still in control. And Lord, that whether we're on a mountaintop or we're down in a valley, God, that you're still there with us. Lord, David said that he could make his bed anywhere that he could think of, God. You would still be there with him because you love us, that you care for us, God. We thank you for everything that you've done and all the blessings that you've bestowed upon us, all the times that we can look back, God, and see that you have blessed us and brought us through every hard time that we've come against, God. We can know that you'll be there with us now for the ones that are coming, God. I thank you for that. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Church, don't ever feel like you can't use the altar. The altar's open whether there's singing happening, there's somebody preaching, or whether there's nothing going on, the altar's open. You're not going to bother anybody. Not going to be out of order. If anything, you may be what starts a movement, so to speak. Turn with me, if you would. We'll be in Exodus chapter 14 this morning. Exodus chapter 14. I appreciate the singing this morning. Just about everything that we've sung this morning has gone right along with the message. Exodus chapter 14. We've got a decent amount of reading here this morning. We're going to read the chapter, but I'll try to be conscious of time. Exodus chapter 14, verse number 1. If you found your place, if you're standing for the reading of the word. Starting verse number 1. It says, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth. That's a good one. Between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land. The wilderness hath shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled. And the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, and the captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out into a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen, and his army, and overtook them, encamping by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou thus dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you this day. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. But lift up thy rod, and stretch out thine hand over the sea, and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh and all his host, and upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of God which went before the camp of Israel removed and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud went from before their faces and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel, and it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that the one came not near the other all the night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked upon the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared. And the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came in the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and their left. And the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. And Israel saw that great work which God did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Lord, I thank you for your word this morning, God. I pray that you'll just speak to us this morning. You'll continue to move through the service, God. Remove the hindrances. God, help us to be able to pay attention. Lord, hide me behind the cross that they only hear your word and what you would have for them, God. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. The story of two hunters that came across a bear so big that they dropped their rifles and ran for cover. That's a bad start already. And one man climbed a tree while the other hid in a nearby cave. And the bear was in no hurry to eat, so he just sat down between the cave and the tree to reflect upon his good fortune, because now he's got 2 meals. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, the hunter in the cave came rushing out and almost ran into the waiting bear. He was running so fast. And then he hesitated, and then he ran back into the cave. And then the same thing happened a second time. Here he came out again, just going as hard as he could go, and then he stopped, and he turned around and ran back real fast. And when he came out for the third time, the companion that he had with him that was in the tree yelled out, and he said, Woody, are you crazy? Stay in the cave. And Woody frantically pants, and he says, Can't. There's another bear in there. Ever feel like Woody? Ever feel like he's stuck between a rock and a hard place, or too bare? Now, a lot of times, life has a way of making us feel like that. Like we're just stuck in a place where we just have very limited options, and frankly, neither one of them are very good. There's a bear on both sides. And often, we just simply call these the trials of life. Things come along and kind of knock us off course a little bit, unexpected. And trials can come in many shapes and forms. We've all seen them. We've all been through them at some point. And the old saying is, either you're in a trial, you just came out of a trial, or you're about to go into a trial. Sometimes it can seem like we're in all three of those categories. I'm in one now. I just left one yesterday, and by George, ain't one there tomorrow too. Many times we find that once we're in those trials, we begin to ask God very quickly to get us out of the trial. There's nothing wrong with that in itself. No one likes to be in a trying time. No one likes to go through the hardships. God even instructs us to bring our needs and our requests to Him so that He can help us in those times. But what do we do when it seems like God is the one that led us into the trial? God is the one that led us into the hard time. God has put us, like old Woody, right between two bear. What do we do when God has orchestrated the trial? Yeah, God does lead us into trials Following God's directions for our lives oftentimes leads us into places that we wouldn't ordinarily choose to go. Daniel probably wouldn't have chosen to go into the lion's den. The 3 Hebrew boys probably wouldn't have chosen to go into the furnace. The disciples wouldn't have chosen to cross the Sea of Galilee at a stormy time. Peter probably wouldn't have been crucified, and Andrew wouldn't have been crucified, and James and Thaddeus and Matthew and Thomas and all these others wouldn't have been martyrs had it not been for Christ's call leading them into a place of hard time. None of them probably would have chosen the paths that they had followed had it not been for the directions of God. I would dare say that most of us can think back to a time in our lives where God has told us to go to a direction that leads to a place we just couldn't understand. God led us straight between a rock and a hard place. Here in this chapter, we find that the children of Israel are not very different. They find themselves smack dab in the middle between Pharaoh's army and the sea, the Red Sea. We know the story how they got to this point. God has called Moses from a burning bush in the desert to deliver the children of Israel from 400 years of bondage. They've been crying out to God for 400 years for deliverance out of the hand of the Egyptians who treated them as no more than slaves. They beat them and they forced them to do the work that they didn't want to do. So God hears their cries. And through Moses and Aaron, God speaks directly to Pharaoh, and he tells him right up front to let his people go. Pharaoh refuses at first. Why would he let the people go? When you think about it, who would give up free labor? Who would give up such an easy time? Not really much perk in Pharaoh letting these people go. So, God begins to send plagues to change the heart of Pharaoh. First came the waters of Egypt turning to blood. For 7 days the waters were unusable. And yet Pharaoh held them in bondage. And then came a swarm of frogs. More frogs than you can possibly fathom in your mind has swarmed the land of Egypt. And yet Pharaoh hardens his heart. And then came lice. The Bible says that the dust of the land became lice. And can you imagine that? And yet Pharaoh still hardens his heart. And then came a disease on all the cattle and the animals of Egypt that all of them died. The children of Israel, their cattle did not die, but the ones of Egypt, the Egyptian-owned cattle died. And yet Pharaoh hardens his heart again. Then came boils and blisters to every Egyptian. And then it rained hail down from the sky. And then locusts came and they ate up all the crops that the hail had not destroyed. And then for 3 days it became dark throughout the entire land of Israel. And the Bible says it was so dark that you could feel the darkness. I don't know if you've ever been in the darkness that thick. I don't think I have. Yet still Pharaoh hardened his heart. He refused to let them go. So lastly, God sends forth and he says, I'm going to slay all the firstborn of Egypt, the animals and the humans. The firstborn of Egypt will die. He gives Israel instructions that we know now as the Passover, and he tells them to take the blood of a spotless lamb, put it on the doorpost, and that will save your firstborn from being thrown in with this Egyptian slaying, so to speak. And only after this happened was Pharaoh willing to let the children of Israel go. It finally broke Pharaoh. And now we find that Israel has begun to pack up and move out. They're following God in the form of a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And God himself led them to the edge of the Red Sea, and he tells them to set up camp where they are. Now, he also tells Moses that Pharaoh is going to have a change of heart. Pharaoh's not going to continue to let them go. Pharaoh says they're stuck in the desert and they got nowhere to go. Why in the world did we let these people go? And he hardens his heart again and he begins to pursue after them so that they are now trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea. They can't cross the sea and they can't go back. Now, after being led by God to exactly where they are, Israel finds itself trapped between a rock and a hard place. So what do? What do we do What is the answer when God leads us to the position of a rock and a hard place? It seems that He's led us to somewhere that's unfavorable at best. Well, I believe we can find the answer in this text. There's three things that Moses and the children of Israel do that can be a lesson for us when we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, especially those times when we've seen, God, you led me here. God, you brought me here. God, I'm following exactly where you told me to go, and yet I don't seem like I'm making any progress here. God, I'm stuck. But yet you brought me here. Why would you lead me into a place that I'm stuck? Well, the first thing we see is that we can find peace in God's power. Verses number 13 and 14, Moses tells Israel to fear not and to stand still. In other words, he says, quit panicking, quit worrying, and quit letting fear control you. How many times does something happen? Whether it's a health report from a doctor is not what we thought it was going to be. The paycheck is a little slim on what we thought it was going to be. Whatever the situation might be, we find ourselves, the first thing that we do is go, oh no. Oh no. What am I going to do now? I got to start doing something. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do that. Yet Moses tells them, fear not and stand still. He says, quit panicking. Quit worrying. You know what happens when we worry? One, we commit a sin because God tells us specifically don't worry. But you know why He tells us not to worry? Because when we worry, we become focused on the problem that's in front of us. And when we focus on the problem in front of us, we can oftentimes pick out the things that look like, man, I can't do anything about that. I can't do anything about the mortgage payment coming in 3 weeks. And I only get paid one more time, and the numbers just ain't adding up to being able to pay this mortgage payment. I can't do anything about the health report that I just got back from the doctor that says we're probably going to have to run some more tests because it ain't looking good. I can't do anything. I can't help those. So to me, those seem like really big problems. And when I worry about them, I take my focus off of God and put it on the problem. So now my problem is now bigger than my God. Because if I'm not looking at God and I'm looking at the problem, I don't even realize what God can do. I don't even realize that God has the power to change this anyway. So now I'm worrying about something that can't be changed, and the only thing that can change it, I'm not even looking for. That make sense? Moses says, we can have peace knowing that God has the power to change the circumstance. What was the only way they were getting out of this? By God making a miracle and parting the Red Sea, giving them a place. Not only did He part the Red Sea, but He makes the land they walk on dry so that they can bring their horses and their carts and everything else through without sinking down in the mud. That was the only way they were getting out of this, was for God to do something. But when I'm too busy worrying and freaking out and panicking and I don't know what I'm going to do and oh my Lord, how did I even get to this point? God, how could you? I'm not even looking for the fact that God is sitting there with a plan waiting to make His move. Not only can we find peace in God's power, but we can use prayer to hear God's plan. Amen. Verse number 15, you have to kind of catch this on the way through or you'll miss it, but Moses is speaking to the children of Israel. Verse number 14, he says, remember, the Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. How does He know that? How does He know that? He's not told Moses yet how they're going to get out of this jam. He simply told him, go and camp. So now here they are. Verse number 15, the Lord responds to Moses and says, why criest thou unto me? What does that tell me? That tells me that at some point Moses has found himself in prayer to God. God, you know the situation we're in. You have brought me here. You told me to come here. You said to go camp by the edge of the Red Sea. You told me to come here. So if you told me to come here, there must have been a reason for it. And you must know what's going to happen. So God, what's the plan? It's not until that Moses prays that God tells him what to do. In verse number 16, he begins to tell him, stick your rod out over the sea and watch it part so you can walk through on dry land. It's not until that point that Moses knows the reasoning that God has brought them there. It's not until that point that Moses understands that God has already made a way for them to go from point A to point B. Has he been like the rest of the children of Israel, saying, why in the world didn't you just leave us in Egypt? They looked at Moses. It's awful funny. They looked at Moses and said, didn't we have graves in Egypt we could have been buried in? What in the world did you bring us out here to be buried for? That's what they told him. They said, we could have died in Egypt, and we'd have died way down the road somewhere, but now we're here and we're going to die here. And Moses says, hey, I've been praying and I know God has a plan. I've been praying and I have heard directly from God. God said for me to stick my rod out and for us to watch what happens. And when we see what God does, we are to get up and go. Now, oftentimes we can find ourselves never making it to this point because we've never found peace, understanding that God has the power to change it to start with. We're still sitting back at point number 1, worrying, oh, dear Lord, what am I going to do? And God says, if you would have peace for just a moment, long enough to pray to me and say, God, let me see your plan. Now that changes the ball game. It changes the story when I look and I see, okay, the Red Sea's here, Israel's here, Pharaoh's here. Death or death. Okay, now God's plan gets thrown in. Now this part, so they have an escape route, and not only that, but when you read the text, God already understood Pharaoh was coming. God told Moses Pharaoh was going to come, and he prepares a blockade. That cloud and the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that they have been following to this point, it says that it goes behind them. And it stands in between Israel and Pharaoh and the armies of Egypt. And it stops the progression of Pharaoh. It says it held there all night so that they could not reach Israel. You following me on that? Not only did God make a way out, God gave them ample time to get out. God protected them while they were sitting there waiting on God to move. Does the spot you're in seem awful hard? Probably. But you know what I can promise you? God's not leaving you dangling for the next however long until He decides He's going to do something. God is still standing there right beside of you, holding you with His hand, saying, I have everything under control. I have everything in my sight. There's nothing that's going to come along that's going to surprise me or that's going to shake things up. I already know it's there, and I've already made provision for it. Now, when we understand that, now it's a whole different ballgame. It's not just I'm stuck in a rock and a hard place anymore. It's God's power enacting God's plan. Now, not only that, lastly, we're to be prepared to give God praise. You know, verse number 17, he says, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them, and I will get me honor upon Pharaoh, upon all his host, and upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. He says it again in verse number 18. He says, they're going to follow you. I'm going to do it to get me honor. God says, I've led you to this point so that I can gain glory from delivering you from this point. Israel makes a name for themselves right here. I wish I'd have wrote it down, but I didn't. There are numerous times throughout the rest of the Old Testament where you'll find that Israel is moving into Canaan. They are moving into the Promised Land, and one of the first things they bring up is this not Israel? that God delivered from the hand of the Egyptians? Is this not Israel that God brought through the Red Sea and closed up the Egyptian army inside of it? Is this not Israel who follows the God that can stop the world's strongest nation? Is that not the God that we still serve today? Now, why has God brought you to this point? So that you can give Him glory when you are delivered. Whatever the problem is, any point in my life that I can look back and say, you know what, that was a hard time, whether it was my own doing or whether it was God bringing me there or whether it was circumstance, whatever it may be, I can look back at it and say, you know what, I can see now how God was working and how God has used that to shape where I am now. And when I understand that, I can say glory to God for every single one of them. Thank you, God, for those things that I have been through, because they have brought me to today so that I can stand here and say God has never let me down. God has never left me alone. God has never failed me. God has never forgotten to love me. God has never left me out to dry. God has never forsaken me. God has stuck right beside me in every single time I have needed Him. Every single day of my life, God has been right there beside of me. And Israel could say the same thing as they marched into Canaan and He led them by that same pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. They could say, you know what, we can remember back when God did the impossible. God did something that I could not do. God solved a problem that I did not have an answer for. And I'm going to give Him glory for it. Because I know He did it then, I know He's going to do it next time, and I'll give Him glory in advance before I even get there. We ought to be ready to give Him praise before it ever happens. We ought to be ready to give Him praise when we get out on the other side. We find ourselves following God's plan. We find ourselves being delivered by God's grace. We are able to use that situation to show everyone else around us how good God has been. You want to know one of the best ways to explain God's love? Simply tell them about the impossible that He's done. The impossible fact that I was born a sinner. And over the course of my life, I have sinned more times than I could ever possibly count. If I sat down and tried to count every one of them, if I could remember them all, I'd never make it to the end. But God did the impossible. Because I could not change that. I could not change the outcome of my sin, which was death. Physical and spiritual, eternal death. But God did the impossible. But when I'm stuck facing death between a rock and a hard place, I don't have a way out. God did the impossible by sending Christ, His Son, to die on the cross. And now I can stand here and give Him glory for what He's done, because it's something I could not do. I can give Him praise for that today. I'll finish with this. Long ago, there was a man who sought the picture of perfect peace. Not finding one that would satisfy him, he announced a contest to produce a masterpiece, whether it be paintings, sculptures, photography, anything you can think of. He said, I want to see perfect peace. So the challenge stirred the imagination of artists everywhere. They brought all their different depictions of peace. And after all of them were unveiled, there were only two left. All the other ones he had looked at and said, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. There were only two left. The judge pulled the cover from one, and the crowd went silent. A painting showed a mirror-smooth lake, reflected lacy green birch trees under a soft blush of the evening sky. It was sunset over top of a lake. Everything was calm and peaceful. Along the grassy shore was a flock of sheep that grazed, completely undisturbed. Everybody thought, surely this was the winner. Look how peaceful this scene is. But the man with the vision uncovered a second painting. Unbeknownst to everybody else, it was one that he painted himself. And when he uncovered it, the crowd, they just gasped in surprise. They couldn't understand what they were seeing. Could this really be peace? And what he had painted was a tumultuous waterfall cascading down a rocky ravine. And the crowd could almost feel its cold spray from the water as they looked at it. It was so real looking. And there were stormy clouds up above that looked as though they threatened to explode with lightning and wind and rain. In the midst of the thundering noises and bitter chill, there was a spindly little tree that clung to the rocks on the edge of the falls. And one of his branches reached out in front of the waters, almost like it was trying to test the waters to see what was going to happen. A little bird had built a nest in the elbow of that branch that stuck out over the water. Content and undisturbed in all the stormy surroundings, all the waters and the lightnings and all these other things that were around, the bird was undisturbed as she rested on the eggs in her nest. With her eyes closed and her wings ready to cover her little ones, she manifested peace that transcends all the earthly turmoil that was around her. See, sometimes it's not the moments where we feel like everything's okay where we find peace. Sometimes it's following God into the places that look like they are just absolutely dangerous. There is no way out. I'm stuck. But that's where we can find true peace. That's where we can find the power of God. That's where we can find God's glory being shown when we follow His plan. Are you here today and you say, you know what, I'm in a place where I just don't have an answer. I don't have a reasoning for why I'm here other than God has led me here. And I'm stuck like Woody between the two bears. I can't go in the cave because I'm going to get eaten. I can't stay out of the cave because I'm going to get eaten. I don't have an answer. Can I tell you that God does? God loves you. And He's not left you somewhere hanging out to dry. Instead, He is simply waiting for you to come to Him and say, God, I need your peace so I can see your plan. If you're here today and you find yourself in that situation, I implore you, come to the altar today and say, God, I want to lay it down at your feet. As the mother who sat on her on the eggs, ready to cover her little children, God says, I will do the same for you. I will take my arms and I will cover you and protect you, just like I did the children of Israel that day at the Red Sea. Brother Eric, if you'll come get us a song invitation, I'll ask you to stand. There's no need to leave here today wondering what we're going to do. There's no need to leave here today feeling worried and anxious and overcome by all the situation. Because Christ has the answer. He loves you and He wants to show you. You just simply have to trust Him and ask. It wasn't until Moses asked that God showed him the plan. It wasn't until the children of Israel moved that they escaped the hardship. If you're here today, I beg you today, come to the altar and lay it at Christ's feet. There.